Hi, everybody. You probably want to know a little bit about my life before I begin talking about my art. And I was born in New York City, and my father was an investment banker. Can you hear me? Okay. My father was an investment banker on Wall Street, and my mother was a homemaker. Where did I get my talent from? My grandmother. My grandmother was Lucy Washington Hurry. She was a watercolorist active between 1910 and 1950. Her husband, my grandfather, was Renwick Hurry. He was a print dealer of American prints, very much a startup business in the early 1900s because there weren't that many people interested in American work. Anyway, my grandmother, Lucy Washington Hurry, is in Who Was Who in American Art. And my grandfather came from a very artistic family, the Renwicks. And my great uncle was James Renwick, the architect and engineer for the design of the Smithsonian Institute and St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City, and also Grace Church. He had a prolific career, and we're all discovering new buildings of his work every week. So I want to talk about my grandmother's, and first of all, I want to say that this is her watercolors that I have in my possession. She did these over her long career, and her studio was in the back of the garden of their house in Hempstead, New York. And she had all kinds of props in her studio. And for me, a 10-year-old kid looking up at what was in the studio, we're talking about costumes, hats, two boats that were the kind of thing that you sail in if you're a child on a very placid boat, yacht basin. Those were the kind of things she had. And I was not allowed to play with them. I just had to look. They were suspended from the ceilings. So she wasn't allowed to have any telephone calls until 12:30 in the afternoon. Now, the next thing I'm interested in is something that shaped my early concept of color. And these two pictures are of Louis Comfort Tiffany's chapel at Laurelton Hall, which is in Oyster Bay, New York. He had 250 acres, and he made this chapel for the Columbia Exposition in Chicago in 1893. It was a World's Fair. And so after the World's Fair was over, and somebody had bought the pieces and put them in at St. John the Divine, he took them back and he put them in his chapel at Laurelton Hall. So when I talked my cousin's friend into letting us into the hall, into this place, and I was astounded by the wonderful Tiffany glass that was pressed into every living surface of cement in that chapel. The chapel was only maybe about 39 feet long by 20 feet wide, and it was a riot of color. There is nothing, I can't even describe these pictures as being really, standout photographs of what you saw when you came into the space. Anyway, the chapel was dismantled, and it was taken to the Charles Hosmer Morse Museum of American Art in Winter Park, Florida. They have the work now. Now, my cousin's friend lived in the studio. Isn't it a wonderful thing when you're rich and you can have buildings for special things on your estate? Anyway, he had all kinds of buildings on his estate, including a huge glass birdhouse, which was like 30 feet high. And unfortunately, the whole place burned down. But the situation with the studio is it's still standing, and it has a lot of things in it that reflect his interest in his travels to North Africa. So it was really quite something to see these things. So anyway, to get to my work, I was not a very good student, but I had a talent in art, and that talent took me from grade school to high school. I went to Oldfield School in Maryland for my high school, and there I was taught how to paint in oil. And so when I got to Garland Junior College, remember those days when we all went to junior colleges, or at least some of us went to junior colleges? I went there, and it's in Boston, and one of the courses that you had to take was sewing, first year sewing. And I liked it so much. I was a really good sewer. I liked it so much that I took sewing for 2 years. And I borrowed my mother's sewing machine, and she got tired of it. So she bought me a new Singer sewing machine, which was portable, and I could have it in school. And I made a wool coat, I made evening clothes, I made cocktail clothes, all the things that I couldn't buy at Bonwood Teller or Filene's Basement. Anyway, then after that, I applied to the Boston Museum School, where I was studying painting for 4 years. And with that, I had a connection to Tufts University. And I graduated from Tufts with a BS in education so I could teach art. Well, I went to New York, which is where my family was, more or less, and there were no jobs for people like me. I didn't have any practical instruction on how to take care of a class. I only had practice teaching. So I ended up working at the Museum of Modern Art as a clerk typist in the education department, typing out envelopes. It was very boring. So I transferred upstairs to work as a secretary. And then eventually I worked for Elaine Johnson, who was the curator of the drawing department. And then I was introduced to artists who brought their work in, and also to dealers who were pushing their artists' work, because that's what people do in New York. They push certain artists' work. Anyway, one day I went up to the trustees' dining room. They were having a meeting, and I had to deliver something for the meeting, and I saw Jasper Johns. They had just purchased a Jasper Johns painting of the United States, and all the states were lettered. He had used this lettering to letter them. And I was so impressed that I thought, oh, wow, I have to do something different, something like this. So I decided to go to the Art Students League at nighttime because I worked in the museum during the day, right? And I started doing these paintings, stain paintings. If any of you are familiar with Helen Frankenthaler's work, she's a second generation abstract expressionist, very popular in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and coming back now. Anyway, I did her, this is the kind of work that I did. This is stain painting, acrylic paint on canvas, and it is, you know, to me, it was abstract. And I got married in 1972, and I had my son in 1972. My husband died in 1972, which was horrible. But after his death, I bought a Singer industrial sewing machine, and so I could use it to sew my canvas pieces. I started tearing up my old paintings and painting them with acrylic, you know, one color on a strip, like this. And I used a palette knife in some areas. See where the squiggly lines are? Well, I would paint first on the squiggly, you know, this kind of yellowy beige color, and then over it I would put gel, and then I would take a palette knife and I would do calligraphy, or what I thought was calligraphy, all along. And there were 2 of these, usually on every piece. So anyway, that's what I was doing. And I sewed these pieces together on the sewing machine. So other influences of mine were Nancy Graves, Jasper Johns, Frank Stella, and Henri Matisse. They were all important people in my quest for difference and adapting my work. So I attracted the attention of a woman who was like a wonderful godmother to artists, and she asked me to make a print with her after I had made my first print. And so I made 2 prints, and one of them, a blue one, is in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art, in the print department. Then there were more colors. What I decided to do was I started to paint on canvas, which I sewed like this. I sewed them together, and the marks were sewn. Here's one on paper, acrylic on sewn paper, and see how the marks are sewn. And then I started making, well, I'll just stay here. So what did I use to make these pieces after a while? I started to use, 140-pound weight paper, which was the heaviest paper that I could find at the time. 140 pounds is you'll see there are 3 pieces in the other room that are 140-pound weight, but don't touch them. They're very, they're fragile. So things that I did, I worked for making trees, vegetables, animal tracks, and roofs also. And then this is a large piece. It's called roofs. And this piece, it's too big to be in the show. It's 12 feet wide. And it consists of 12 sections. But it's all about the roofs of barns in the places where I visited. Again, I use wood cutting tools and paint powders to color them. Now, the paint powders I found out were very toxic, and so I decided that I had to use acrylic paint, and I used it as a binder. I used a binder with it called Tragicant gum. So it becomes easier to use, and it's stable. Now, the pieces that I did online, the pieces that I did on canvas, I use glue sometimes to make the marks. And then during that time, and that work went on from 1977 to 1980. And in those 4 summers, I had the wonderful chance to live on Bush Island, which is near the mouth of the LaHave River on the south shore of Nova Scotia. And during that time, I made an enormous number of paper pieces. Then in 1978 into the 90s, I made different pieces of work, and this piece is plastic sheeting with paint powder in the plastic sheeting. And this is a detail, but you see how the paint powder sticks to the rest of it. However, the pieces are so porous with the sewing, they were, in my mind, a health hazard. So I stopped making them. But this piece was shown at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts in a show, which I was very happy about. Okay, this is a painting of again, using glue, and this is on canvas and acrylic. So anyway, that's one of the samples. Here are other samples of pieces on paper, again, 140-pound weight. And these are the 3 pieces that are in the show. The orange spillway, the blue spillway, and the yellow spillway. Now these, I had a boyfriend who lived on the other side of the Hudson River, and he had a farm. And in the spring, we only heard the rushing water because there was an Ashokan reservoir there, and that Ashokan reservoir supplied most or part of New York City's, water supply, and those were very important. Now, okay, during that time, I made house rakes, tools, sculptures, and this piece is an Adam and Eve piece, and the next piece is a piece that was, if you're offended by nudes, look the other way. It's Adam chasing Eve. So anyway, that's the story on that. Now, These are the pine pieces that I made during the 80s and the 90s. Again, these were, I guess the feeling is that they were, I was very interested in Joel Shapiro's work. He's a sculptor, and he made a lot of houses out of metal. And so I thought, well, let's make a rake. So then I went into making fish and waves, and this is a three-dimensional piece with acrylic and whatnot. Then I went into taking antique, like post, anyway, these portraits by Renoir and Manet, post-impressionist artists, and I put them, in this case, the lady with the flower in her bosom. The background is Maine. I spent a couple of summers in Maine. Then this is a piece that is acrylic on canvas, also sold to a collector at that time, up in Maine. A garden of a friend in Maine, but you can see that the marks are still very involved, and you'll see from my earlier work, I transposed them into this kind of thing. Here's another one, also Maine. And this is near Millbrook, New York, a farm called Little Farm. It's really in the name of the farm. And McGee Hill, I would say that Dutchess County originally was a milk-producing county for New York City, and as less people drink milk now, the dairy business has fallen apart, and so most of this land is used, by people who purchase it with lots of money, and they're trying to keep up, agricultural exemptions, but, they're trying. But anyway, now, during the I would say after 2019, because we had COVID and I was scared to go outside, so I read newspapers and magazines, and the most important thing to me was to make portraits of people I saw in magazines. For example, Emily Bronte is here, and Lil Nas X, I don't know if you know him, but he's a hip hop artist and very popular. I have a print that is in the other room, and I'm happy to make more prints of people like that image and they want to purchase it. Here's another infant from the magazine. I think it was Town and Country. You'd never expect them to make an image like this. It seems sort of like, ooh. Anyway. And here is Emily Bronte. This is when I started to, make color photographs print them, and of the pieces, rip them up, and put them down with either sewing or glue on the paper. So this is a paper piece, just so you know. In 2006, I bought a house in Amenia, New York, which is near Millerton, Sharon, Connecticut, and Millbrook, New York, so I could paint and garden. And the prior paintings of landscapes like this were painted during that time. Okay, here's another ripped up portrait. This man is a bookseller. I know him. And again, there's a mixture of, material and photographs of him in the paper piece. Here is David Lynch. He is, maybe some of you know him or know about him. He's a multimedia artist, and he had a show at the Academy. His work, I did a portrait of him, and then I thought, let's take a photograph of it and do the same thing, rip it up and sew it down again, which I did, and it's in the other room also. And if you see in the back, you'll see the markings of the work, the sharp tools that I used to make this piece. Here's another. This is Tilly Strauss. She's an artist who lives up the road from me in Amenia. And again, I did a portrait of her, and then I tore it up and put it down like this. Here is a British officer. Again, these are all things that I did while I was, not going out too much when COVID was around. And so this officer is a British officer. He was some kind of a lord, and he was killed in the campaign, one of the campaigns in Ireland, and his portrait was for sale at Sotheby's. And so again, I messed that up, and then I have put it back together again. The point is that I wanted to make something different. I wanted to distinguish myself, not by just doing regular old realistic work. So, well, I guess my feeling is that ripping the paper reproductions up into several sections and using them as collages for portraiture creates a disorientation of our lives now, our frustrations, our anger, and the craziness of current life today. And that's what I have to say. Does anyone have questions that they'd like to ask? Don't be embarrassed, speak up. If you have a technical question, I'd be happy to answer it.
Hi, this is Sharon Lowe's. I don't have a technical question. I want to know how you rip the paper.
I just,
Standing up or are you sitting?
it doesn't matter, I just rip it. I take the middle between the two eyes and I rip, and I hope for the best. Okay? And then, when I finished ripping, there's one section that's white, and I cut that off, okay? I take a pair of scissors and cut that off. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sewn paper.
Yes.
How do you do that? Is that just simply run it through the time?
How do I do the sewn paper? I I had this wonderful antique sewing machine. When I bought it, the man I bought it from, I said, "How old is this machine?" He said, "It's older than you are, ma'am." Well, it may have been made in the 20s or the 30s, I don't know. But, you know, once you put a hole with the needle in the paper, that's it. You know, you have to, you know, accept that that is it, and you can't take it back. So I would go back and forth with the sewing machine to, you know, lock the stitch, and then I would go forward. Am I answering your question?
I have a question. Okay, I'll make it really loud. It's good. Okay. My question is, if you're sewing the paper, I bet you're sewing it to a base, something like canvas
Yes.
or cloth for stability.
I'm sewing it to a large piece of 140-pound weight paper. Okay?
On paper.
Yes. See, you can see in this portrait of David, you can see on the top where the hair stops. That's the background paper. It's 140-pound weight. I can't use anything less because it just is too fragile and it won't hold.
Did you? Oh, it's okay.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yes?
Good.
Yes?
Got it.
No, I'm just wondering if, is that it once it's sewn? Once it's sewn, is that it? Or do you ever go back in and work?
Well,
on the
I lock
patterns
the stitch in the beginning, and then at the end, I lock it again.
You lock it again, but
Yes.
you don't do anything with the color or
No,
the other media
you
or
know,
anything. All of that is a
usually,
given.
I paint the acrylic, and it's all acrylic, these paper pieces, because oil paint stains the paper, and it's very, very bad to use oil paint on paper unless you prepare the paper with gesso before as a medium.
I notice on this one, he has two mouths. So
Yes.
it seems obvious you'd started with two prints of his face. Have you ever done more than two? How does that work?
Let's see. Hold on. You know, maybe you have an idea that I can use. I would say that, you know, trying to get a rip between the two eyes and the nose and the mouth, that is disjointing the portrait enough, and then putting material in like this disjoints it some more. And I painted this man, so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I painted this man with a ruff collar because he requested that I paint him with a ruff collar, which is a Dutch thing from the 1600s. So, yes, that was, so I have not done anything, well, let's put it this way. This one of the British officer that's torn up, there is, in the middle, there's a hairline and a beard, and that's from somebody else's portrait, okay? I put it in there, and that's, you know, I'm not sure if it relates, but to me, I put it in there and I thought it was okay.
I have a comment and a question. The comment is, maybe it's two questions. How typical is it for artists to have such a range of style and media? And the second part is, what inspires you to change and attempt something so different each time?
Okay, this is over a period of years. I've been painting for 60 years. And so in order to grow as a painter or as an artist, one has to push forward. And it's kind of scary to do that, but you have to do it. And I would say that doing this, I mean, if you look at some of the early work of Jasper Johns, for example, he did beer cans, and I dearly wanted to buy one of his multiple beer cans, but I couldn't afford it. It was too expensive. So, but now he does other art images, and it's the same thing. He's pushing forward. And so it's really important as an artist for you and everyone here who is an artist is to experiment and to push yourself forward because it makes you a better artist. Yes?
How are you thinking? Like,
What?
do you, the left, do you paint like the left one?
Yes, the painting is oil on canvas. And I took the image and I went across the street to the printer and I said, make me a print of this, such and such a size. And he did that for everything. And that's how I ripped it up.
So you really have in mind how it's going to wind up when you paint it?
I'm sorry, I didn't
Like,
understand.
well, I'm talking about you painted the left-hand one,
Yeah,
and when you're painting that, did you have in mind that you were going to do an arrangement?
no, I had nothing in mind about ripping everything up. It just sort of evolved. For example, this painting of Emily Bronte, see this? It's got little pieces of paper that have been painted with acrylic, and they were glued onto the surface of the oil paint. Now, that might not be a good idea as far as the conservator goes, but at this point, I don't care because, you know, they'll have to develop, if I were a famous artist, they would have to develop a way to restore it if it went, you know, bad. So.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for your message, Emily.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I love coming here.